Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. Got a great show for you today. Joining us is lead advisor here at Startups.com, my colleague, Vadim. I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. But as always, we're joined by our producer, Q, and Jen. Those of you know, she's my executive operations here at Startups.com. Super excited. My name is Ed Kang, Chief Strategy Officer for Startups.com, seven-time founding founder, 2Exits myself, and we're excited to share what we have for you today. Before we begin, I'm just going to throw it out there right now. I'm going to say, hey, type in your question into the Q&A box now. So we want to load up those questions, start typing them in. Jen is going to be watching the chat as well as the Q&A box, and she's going to pepper us with questions as soon as they start coming in. We're going to change it. We're going to answer them as we go because it's going to be a very fluid conversation in terms of what we got going on. As always, we appreciate all of you members here at Startups.com and our audience, anybody who's been watching this today. Vadim, welcome. Let's introduce you. Share with everyone just an introduction. A lot of people know you already, but give us an idea of background and then how you came to be here at Startups.com working with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ed, and thanks for having me. So my background is that of many founders. I've been starting companies since I was about 18 years old. I've also worked with entrepreneurs and worked with startups, primarily in the 0 to 1 phase. That's where I thrive across tech, deep tech, direct-to-consumer businesses, B2B companies, through the organizations that I've partnered with, my own companies, and the venture funds that I've worked with as well. Most recently, though, right before coming to Startups.com, I ran my own education venture. We raised a little bit of money, but we mostly bootstrapped it to about $1 million in revenue and 500 adult learners before coming here to Startups.com.
And what happened? How come you're not riding into the sunset? Let's just, call up the elephant in the room. Not to say that I'm complaining that you've joined us and you're helping, but what happened to your startup?
Yeah, so the startup is still going, but my brother, I have a twin brother, identical twin brother. His name is Sergey. He used to run entrepreneurial investments at NYU. I skipped this part of my story, but I was a professor at NYU as well before starting the education venture. He's the one that's running with the business. But as you guys know, when you're building a company throughout its lifetime, there's a lot of ups and downs, and sometimes you're in a down cycle like a lot of companies are experiencing during this time, right? Where you may need to pivot, where you may need to go after a different customer segment, or you may just need to re-innovate. So the company's still going, but we achieved great heights, and then the market shifted where the demand for the product shifted as well. So Sergey's out there looking for new markets, and I decided to join Startups.com.
That's great. Now, there's nothing wrong with going in and working a job or looking at it. And sometimes a startup is not going to get to that unicorn. Like if you've got a great little startup and it's making $1 to $5 million a year, that's a small business. Like absolutely nothing wrong with that. And want to encourage everybody who's listening. It's totally cool. Question for you, Vadim. How much do you think you got that bug still in terms of, because I have it, in terms of, hey, you want to go out to the venture? Like I was sitting on a pitch today and I was like, man, I'd really love to get in there and be a co-founder or be employee number one. I fought the temptation. I'm on the back 9 of my career, but what do you think in terms of how's that itch going for you?
I think this stuff comes in cycles, but most entrepreneurs I know you're like that as well, Ed, our CEO and myself too. Once a founder, always a founder. I think at a certain point you kind of realize, even though it's hard, even though there's ups and downs, a ton of rejection, really horrible moments at some point, there are also a lot of amazing moments, a lot of moments of elation and impact and all that stuff that are addicting. And even if you stop building a company at one point, you'll probably start building another one in the future. It may look very different. For example, my last company was an education company. I had a sense that I would start an education company most of my career because I grew up in a family of educators, but I was mainly starting software companies before that. So we don't know what the evolution of our entrepreneurial journey will be. It may be a different kind of project. I might want to start a venture fund at some point, right? I don't really know yet, but the average age of first-time entrepreneur is 42. I'm still in my 30s, late 30s, and I started my first company at 18. So I feel like I have a couple of more at-bats to try again.
It's the at-bats. All right, so share with us, what is your regular day look like in terms of being here at Startups.com? I don't know if a lot of people even know because you just get to drop in and give advice, but talk us through, what do you do at Startups.com? What does an average perfect day look like for you?
So one of the reasons why I was really excited to join Startups.com, and I think you're the same way, Ed, and after you've kind of done it, worked for different companies, started different companies, you start to get an idea of where you thrive, right? And that's something that's really hard in your 20s because you're still kind of figuring things out. What am I really good at? What are my strengths? For me, about the time I hit 30, I realized I don't have to be good at everything, but there's certain things I'm quite good at, maybe even better at than most people out there. And so one of the things that I'm always excited about every day at Startups.com is working with early stage founders. I work with founders from 0 to 1 and 1 to 100, whatever you want to say. That 0 to 1 though is super challenging. And when you're working with a founder that just, you give them advice, you work through a problem with them, they go out and execute, come back with other problems, but having done something exciting, that always interests me, right? It's what I've done with venture funds that I've worked at, and I saw it and see it very similarly here at Startups.com. So my typical day, perfect day, is when I get to connect with founders, whether it's through the live events that we host or the working on your startup sprint sessions or all the other opportunities that we have for founders, connecting with them, giving them direction, giving them tactical advice, and then standing back so that they can do the work. I also do a lot of work with our founders who are looking to raise money. These are typically founders that already have some traction. I always advise companies to have traction first before going out and talking to investors, to give themselves a higher valuation, to give themselves strength when talking to other people with money, and to increase the chances of securing financing. So we work with a lot of companies at that stage. Oftentimes it's second, third time founders who are looking to accelerate the process to their fundraise and make sure they're meeting with the right investors and actually securing their, let's say, 500 to $1 million, $3 million raise.
And when you're working with those founders, you're helping them with everything from pitch decks, outreach, messaging, what that narrative looks like, deciding how much to raise, terms, like total soup to nuts. You handle them all the way through.
Yeah, I think between myself, you, and the rest of the team here at Startups.com, we've seen a lot of different use cases. And as everybody knows, not only does technology change, but markets shift and can shift very, very quickly. Sometimes it's natural shifts, like, hey, we have a new innovation like AI, and so investors are all kind of following a different direction. Sometimes it's random shifts, like actual markets and what's happening. And so you have to adjust with those times. And because we see it all and kind of have that bird's eye view of the market real time, we're able to provide that direction for our founders to make sure they're spending their time in the right areas. So it could be within the context of a fundraise. It could be within the context of, hey, I need to execute so that every time I'm meeting with an investor, I impress them with a continuous traction I'm able to get for my business. What area should I be executing in to bolster my narrative to those investors? And it might not even just be investors. It could be people that you're hiring, potential partners, customers that you're talking to, and the like. And so a lot of that stuff all across the board will helping founders think through.
Okay, so for everybody watching this live and those of you who are watching the recording, reach out to Vadim if you want to talk about your fundraise and going from 0 to 1. Let me get into some questions here, and let's really get down to some nitty gritty for a moment here. And I'm going to load up the first question. When it comes to going from 0 to 1, let's talk about that, Vadim, because you've seen it all. I've seen it all. We have hundreds of founders that we're interacting with on a monthly basis. When we say 0 to 1, what does that mean for you? What's your definition?
For me, that means revenue, and more than just a couple of dollars. I've started a lot of businesses where, it'll make like 3, 5, 10 grand in a year. That doesn't really help anybody. That doesn't get exciting. You maybe identified something, but you haven't identified anything repeatable, right? And that's ultimately what a business is, a repeatable system of generating revenue to have a sustainable business where you can have impact while also paying the bills. So for me, 0 to 1 is figuring out something repeatable. Now, does that mean reaching perfect product market fit? Not necessarily. No, that doesn't have to be the case. But it's getting to some kind of system where you have a product, it's valuable enough to drive interest, leads, and then you have a system for converting those leads into paying customers. So, again, this could mean 0 to 1 could mean $0 in revenue to $100,000 in revenue. It could mean to $1 million in revenue, but it has to be something that's substantial and repeatable at the very least.
You're saying that 0 to 1 really is the first step in terms of proving out that things are valid and you are on your way to product market fit. I'm curious because I recognize some of the names in the audience. So my man Doug's in the audience. Doug, if you're catching this, put in the chat how you got from 0 to 1, because I'm a personal user of your product. I'm curious what you did from 0 to 1, or what was that first step to understanding, hey, we're on our way to product market fit. But back to you, Vadim, in terms of 0 to 1, generating that revenue, because that's the sign that, all right, my idea is validated. And if people are willing to pay, because you and I both know the best feedback that you're ever going to get is when you tell someone the price. All right. So if they say no, absolutely not, no way, well, there's some issues going on. But what would you say is the number one advice? If you had to give one piece of advice and say, look, to go from 0 to 1, I would do this every single time. I know I'm putting you on the spot. What would it be?
Work on something that you know and understand. There's a lot of people out there. I can't tell you how many people I met back in 2009 and 10 that were saying, hey, I came up with Facebook first. You know, it wasn't Mark Zuckerberg, where we all know that execution is what matters. But could you have actually built the social network? You know, could you have actually gotten it popular in Harvard and then other universities and figured out how to build in the hooks into the product that would create that virality early on? Probably not. So a lot of people chase trends. And don't get me wrong, it's important to look at trends, but it's much more important to actually work on something that you understand, work on a problem that maybe you personally experience. So at the very least, you really understand. Remember earlier when I said the average age of a first-time entrepreneur is 42 years old? There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
That's someone that has already worked for at least 20 years in their career. They understand things, they understand markets, and they're able to see opportunities that they might be able to take advantage of. So every single time you should be working on something that you actually understand and can bring to fruition.
Here's my advice. Try to sell it right from inception and get that idea validation going. If you want to go 0 to 1, that's not going to take you from 0 to 1, but it'll provide the foundation for you to understand how to go from 0 to 1. I think that's so important. So I was telling founders yesterday, we were talking about pitch decks. I create a pitch deck and I try and sell investors and customers right from day one. As soon as the idea is conceived in my mind, I go, can I try and sell this? And that's where I get all this feedback from. So you combine that work. So start off, I would say Vadim's advice is my advice. Start off with something that you know. It's that domain expertise, founder problem fit, founder market fit, and then prove out founder market fit by trying to sell it. And that's the big issue that I see is people are scared, Vadim. Like, you know what it's like. It's like there's rejection and people don't want to go out there and talk about and face rejection in the beginning. So maybe they'll keep working on their product till it's perfect. I'm sure you've seen this.
I've seen it. I've done it myself. And look, it is inherently scary in that our brains are wired to fear this type of rejection, to fear even taking initiative sometimes. A really great book that I read early on is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. That really talked about, within the context of artists, but also in the context of entrepreneurs, how we oftentimes tell ourselves why we shouldn't do something and how it's really embedded within our brains to protect ourselves, right? From, I don't know, wild animals or other tribes or whatever it is. But in reality, it's our job to reprogram our brains in some ways, but also recognize that a lot of these scary things are completely perceived threats, not real threats. Because what's going to happen if somebody rejects you, right? And that's part of the reason why, by the way, I always tell people to go out and do sales if you're looking for a job and you want to get some experience that'll help you as a founder in the future. Is once you do sales, you realize it's a numbers game, and you realize that actually I should be looking forward to a rejection in some ways, because that no is one step closer to a yes, right? So rejection is not final. It might be only one opportunity. Look, sometimes it hurts and stings, and it's okay to be upset for an hour or a day or whatever it is. But then you have to pick yourself up and try again and realize that rejection is part of the process. Every single person out there that succeeded in any business or initiative had a ton of rejection and failure. And you'll find that if you read any biographies of successful people.
When I think about founders raising money, if you're not willing to go get rejection from friends, family, and associates, I think to myself, you're not going to raise from the big guns. And then when it comes to sales, going from 0 to 1, if a founder is unwilling, and I'm an investor, founder is unwilling to go and sell hand-to-hand combat, founder-led sales, get in the face, then I worry. Because how are they going to handle all the ups and downs? Because if I need to get you to scale and you need to go and sell $100 million worth and you're unwilling to get on the front lines and learn what it takes to sell, well, that's a big red flag for me. So that's all, like, whoever's listening, what Vadim says, I cannot stress enough. He understands what that looks like. And going from 0 to $1 million, that's not a small feat. So Vadim, would you say you primarily did hand-to-hand combat sales, founder-led sales in the beginning, or what were some of the techniques that got you to that first $1 million?
Look, I've been in sales since I was 24. I started my career in finance. I quickly realized it wasn't for me, but I'm not a natural-born salesperson, but I got good at it through tons and tons and tons of practice and trial and error. And so I do founder-led sales for every single company I start. And oftentimes there's some element of sales that I've done for my roles, like even as a product manager, you know, I would come in as a sales engineer sometimes, right? For different startups that I worked at because I understood tech enough and was also good at sales. You have to do founder-led sales. We had 500 students. Out of those 500, I would say a solid 300, maybe even 350 were closed by myself and my co-founder, my brother.
Wow.
We brought in every single dollar of the first $100,000 in revenue, and then obviously stayed really close in the sales process and sort of upsell process, even once we started hiring salespeople. You have to close your own deals. I don't care if you're an engineer, a product CEO, a designer, a marketer that's never done sales, it is a skill you're going to have to learn. But the good news is, as a founder, it is a little bit easier because nobody can communicate the vision better than you.
So true.
And people want to talk to founders.
Yeah,
They,
so
they
true.
feel like, oh, I'm talking to another CEO, another leader. Let me give them a shot, even if they don't have the perfect pitch or they're perfect at sales.
And that's why you shouldn't bring in a salesperson from day one, because not only do you have the advantage, but of selling it, you have the advantage of listening and you understand. So when they say, this is what I'm dealing with, like you already know the product, you can integrate it and you can make some decisions right on the fly. So it's great. Let's look at Doug, and we're going to try and get Doug on the show, just twisting his rubber arm to try and get Doug on the show. But I asked him, I said, what did you do to go from 0 to 1? And Doug wrote, I saw blogs and user forums full of YouTubers suffering in silence and leaving comments. Once we had a viable product ready to sell, I had about 10 forums I posted to. So he posted in forums, which helped with early SEO, and cross our fingers users would want to purchase. So flat out, go find where they are, listen. And that's a really great tool. This is where I think there's potential in terms of hacking an online community, going and listening. Like, the people in the comments and forums, they're suffering and they're underserved, underestimated. They're basically underrepresented in terms of that's an opportunity. If you can go and someone takes the time to reach out, so commenting there and reaching out to them, that's a form of one-on-one sales. And so Doug was saying, okay, asking these questions, what are the biggest challenges you're facing when you do these types of things? So asking a whole bunch of questions. Do you see a growing demand for podcasting and video content creation tools among educators and students? So I'm not sure if that's a question that you're asking, Doug, but I think that those are questions that should be asked if you're trying to do one-on-one sales. Vadim, what are you thinking in terms of when you read something like that and how to go in and hack an online community or listen and try and find the people that you can engage with? Basically what Doug said. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, cut my teeth in transactional sales, so to speak, not enterprise sales. So I'm very, very comfortable with building individual relationships and converting them essentially into something valuable. Some of those questions that I'm seeing, they feel like some customer discovery / needs analysis somebody might do in a sales process. And so when you're building something new, there's a ton of uncertainty. You're not actually exactly sure what value to convey to the prospect, right? You might not sure even who you should be selling to, but you need to run experiments. And so what I see here is some questions that are great to help you understand the needs of a potential customer, potential market, and then understand that once you get some of these questions answered, you need to then decide, okay, I'm actually going to double down on this market, or you know what, those answers were weak. It's not really a pain point for this customer. Let me double down on a different segment of the market, right? Because even YouTube creators can mean a lot of different things. How many followers do they have? What kind of content are they creating? Who are they selling to, right? So you may need to refine your customer profile further to really figure out that sales process. The last thing I want to say is, I think customer discovery kind of gets a bad rep because it's like, just like MVPs. So many people have talked about it. It's like, okay, I get it. But customer discovery is just early sales, right? At some point, this should turn into a refined sales process, but this is your initial opportunity to understand the actual pain of the customer, to refine your pitch, and then turn those customer discovery calls into sales.
Looks like we do have a question. Doug was asking a question. Jen, I'm going to leave that to you to get that question organized and get ready for us, but I'm going to turn it over to Q. Q has created a list of questions. She does the research. So let's bullet through a few of these questions, and then Vadim, I'll let you answer them and I'll jump in, and then we can get to some audience questions right after, and we'll sprinkle back and forth. We got some good activities planned for you, Vadim, today. Q, what do we got first?
First question today, Ed, is in your experience as a founder and advisor, what's the most critical first step a startup founder should take when launching a new venture?
Yeah, so we talked about working on something and selling, but really it's talking to other humans. To Ed's point, you can build forever, and like you may need to build a bit, but getting out there and talking to other people, which typically is what we are afraid of, or we just don't feel like doing, is what you should be doing first. Usually our gut tells us what you should be doing first because we're trying to avoid it at all costs, because it's hard, because there might be rejection, whatever it is. So even outside of selling or building something, it's really just talking to other humans, ideally talking to other humans that you believe have the problem that you're looking to address.
I heard talk to people who ideally have the problem. And this brings us to something, Vadim, that I'm going to ask you point blank. Let's not be polite and nice to our founders, okay? Because what ends up happening is founders end up creating a solution, then they look for a problem. Maybe they've come up with a solution and they just see, oh, this could be super cool. Blockchain, that's awesome. AI, that's awesome. Or they have a niche themselves that they want to scratch. And then they go and try to sell the solution. So they take customer discovery and they say, it's about discovering whether people will want to buy my solution. When you're saying, talk to them about the problem, in your estimation, how many founders at Startups.com that you talk to, when you get down to brass tacks, have created a solution and now they're just trying to shoehorn into the problem, and that's where all the friction happens?
A majority. I mean, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 could be a good estimate. It depends on the day. It's a very common mistake to make. And by the way, you could actually luck into the right solution that way.
Sure.
But it's not an efficient way to do it. And actually, oftentimes founders will find that they're wasting a year or 2 years of their life/venture working on the wrong thing that way. So you got to take the opposite approach.
Okay, you heard it here, and I was thinking 80%. 80% of the time, founders come and they have a solution looking for a problem. Let me explain what that is. That is, you actually haven't talked to someone about the problem and you haven't learned about the problem. You started working on the solution right away, and then you want to know how I'm going to sell this and talk to people about problems. And you end up getting into challenges where you have created something that you think is great in your mind, but nobody cares. So you've yielded in $150,000 to build your SaaS or your app, and nobody's using it whatsoever. And this is the issue that occurs. I would agree 100%. I can't endorse it enough. The very first thing, I like the way Vadim put it, talk to humans, but talk to them about the problem before you start selling your solution, before you start just dream about the solution. You will save yourself so much heartache by doing that, and that's the first step. Okay, now let's get into question. Jen is ready. Jen, what's the question that we've got?
All right, so we got two. We're going to start with, do you see a growing demand for podcasting and video content creation tools among educators and students?
Well, let me put it this way. So I ran a podcast for 3 or 4 years. We had about 250 episodes. I studied the space. I've been to all the conferences. I've given talks about it. So I do care about podcasting and have a general sense of things. I do think that sometimes these markets are overinflated, if it makes sense, because I can tell you for the 3 years I was going to podcast conferences, people were saying ad revenue from podcasts is going to double, triple in the next 3 or 4 years, all this stuff that honestly did not come true. And actually the podcasting market, in my mind, plateaued a little bit. Now, does that mean there's not a growing demand from educators and students for these tools? No. Can I tell you exactly what that growing demand is in aggregate? No. What you should do, though, to discover if there is a growing demand is, again, go out into the market. One thing, though, that I'll clarify is, yes, for investors and everything, we need to communicate big markets. But to actually build your product or your service 0 to 1, you don't have to go into a massive market. You don't have to even go after a market that is taking off, and doubling or tripling every year. You should probably be going after a growing market. It helps create some tailwinds in what you're building. But your job in the beginning is just to find your sort of 1,000 true fans, so to speak. In other words, out of the billions of people out there or the hundreds of millions that might be in your market, what are the thousands that actually will demand your product? And that most likely will happen within a particular niche. So I wouldn't really overthink whether or not you should pursue something based on some trends that may or may not be accurate.
Let me ask about education in particular, because I'm interested. I've got a venture in education, but by no means am I an expert. You've lived in that world. Do you think that if you are a professor at Harvard, you should have a podcast?
Probably not.
Why not?
But because it depends on what kind of professor. If you are a pure academic, it's less interesting. And a lot of professors are tenured. They haven't been in the field for a long time. If you're also a practitioner, then probably you have something to say that'll be interesting to the market. The other thing with podcasting, though, to remember is only some humans out there, and Ed, you're obviously an example of that, and so are our founders who have a podcast. Only some people out there are charismatic enough to be a host of a podcast, if that makes sense, right? And it's okay if you're not. And so I think the job of the person that asked that question is to go out there and talk to 10, 20 professors and think for themselves how many of them should actually be putting content out there because they're also personality. And what you'll probably find is it's going to be about 2 out of 20, right? But that doesn't matter though, because let's say there's, again, I'm throwing these numbers out there, but let's say there's 50,000 or 100,000 professors out there. Well, if your market is a few thousand, that could be enough, right? But I wouldn't say every single professor out there needs to have a podcast. It depends.
Also, the incentive systems, like when you're tenured, you are not really incentivized to go public and bring people out. It's more of like a gated, someone pays and gets out there, unless you're trying to build a brand for yourself, which lends me to the next question. What do you think you're looking at education, you're looking at Harvard professors. What do you think is the intersection between podcasts and education? What's the future? What are you looking at?
I think that people consume the content that they want to consume. So if you believe that you can create really high quality content with a unique perspective and insight, you will have followers, you will grow an audience, you will be successful with your podcast. Now, if we're talking about some kind of specialized podcasts that are used as an educational tool, which is maybe what this founder is thinking about, that can supplement the curriculum of the course, now that starts to get interesting, because I personally am all about practical learning. And so I believe that our education can use more of that, especially higher education can use more of practical learning, where you're learning about the real-time reality of the market, which unfortunately a lot of tenured professors aren't able to provide. They haven't been in the game for usually many, many different years. And as you're saying, Ed, oftentimes incentives aren't aligned. But also, these professors might not want to be creators. It's the same question I would ask somebody that's saying, hey, should I build my own personal brand online? Well, yes, personal brands are the thing. And yes, if you can create and build an audience, you probably will be all set and will be able to get customers at any time with any new product that you build. But do you want to do that? Not everybody needs to have their own audience. There's all sorts of implications that come with that. And again, I think it's a subset of the population that'll be successful with that. I think podcasts will play an increasingly bigger role, but again, it's not for everybody.
I think you're right. You hit the nail on the head. Do you want to be a creator? So that's where I would say if there's an intersection between educator and creator, because I've learned a lot of stuff on YouTube and podcasts that I didn't learn in school, and I wouldn't sit in a boring ass lecture. I think that there's a future for delivering things via a podcast sort of thing. Not maybe the Netflix. I know some startups have gone on, they tried to create the Netflix of education. You see masterclass out there. I don't know. I'm waiting to see. But here's an interesting comment that came through from Doug again. I do think that there is a place for students to learn how to do video and students to present instead of writing an essay, do a video. Because here's the thing. And let me go back here, and this is where we're going to get philosophical, but I'd love to hear, Vadim, your thoughts and what the audience thinks. There was a time where I had an educator, he challenged me, and he said, I want you to read this book on like the path of education, or where the education system came from. There was something that I think it was called the Trivium or something like that. And the original education was a liberal arts. So back in the medieval days, you would have to go to school and you would have to learn rhetoric, vocabulary, and like critical thinking or debate or something like that. So you learned how to talk, how to present, and then you got into the technical stuff. And the argument was these days we're just going right into technical. And we're not learning how to present, not learning how to be charismatic, be a creator, use media. And there was this country, I believe it was Norway, somewhere in that region. They saw their community, the population, start to decline. And they said, we need to invest in the future. So they created these little mini schools where anybody could go, but you had to be chosen and you couldn't pay to get in there. It was government funded. And they taught you how to debate, how to do a video presentation, all those things. And these individuals became the leaders after they learned the technical stuff. So I think that there's definitely a role, if you're looking at ed tech, for people who want to get into ed tech, I think that creating tools for students to go out and give presentations and getting teachers to go, yeah, I want to take a video presentation rather than sit and read an essay. I think that's an interesting prospect. What do you think, Vadim?
I definitely think so. And I'll add something here, though, kind of going back to what we talked about, which is, I'll touch on a couple of things, but which is, do you want to be a creator? There's a lot of entrepreneurs that I talk to here at Startups.com inclusive, where at some point I'll hear something like, this is innovative, I need to educate the market. Or maybe in this case, hey, everybody should be podcasting, I need to educate you on the benefit of being a creator. Those are inherently very, very difficult businesses to build and get off the ground, because not only do you have to convince someone that they have the problem, you then have to make them want to use your product. It's easier to sell to someone, to convince someone of the value of what you're building, if they already feel the problem, or in this case, if they already want to be a creator. Now, here's where I'll kind of play devil's advocate with myself based on what you just said, Ed, because I agree with 100%. A lot of people suck at communicating, increasingly more, because we have TikTok, because we no longer have to write things by hand, right? Because now we have ChatGPT that can do things for us. People are becoming worse and worse communicators. And I believe that skill, whether it's public speaking, whether it's speaking in a one-on-one conversation or in a meeting and knowing how to manage a meeting, or even writing an email, quite frankly, I think those skills are actually going to be differentiators in the future for somebody to stand out, to build relationships, and to actually be successful in a career. So I would say because a lot the newest generations are born with technology, I would say that message could resonate because yes, if there's a tool that can make them a better communicator, then they should absolutely be using that tool. But if you're building a business around that, it's going to be easier to sell to someone that actually already recognizes the fact that they need to become a good communicator to be competitive in the workforce or to be competitive as an entrepreneur in the future.
And that need is going to grow more and more. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion for sure. I wasn't expecting to go down that path. Jen, is there another part to the question or are we good?
There was the second part. How do you edit the Mentors podcast?
That was a podcast that I ran.
Oh, gotcha.
So kudos for Googling me real quick. So guys, similar to, I like to learn in and out everything that I'm working on. So if I'm building a product, and in this case, the product was a podcast, I want to be able to do everything really well first before I delegate it. Similar to sales, right? If I'm going to build software, I'm going to probably learn a little bit about coding, even if I'm not going to be a software engineer, which is what I did earlier on in my career. My brother and I edited out of the 250 podcasts, at least 50%, if not more. We hired editors at some point, but remember, right now we do have better tools available, I will say, with AI and the like, but this was before AI. I mean, we started, I believe, in 2018, so it wasn't a million years ago, but AI is relatively new in terms of the options that we have for tools available. But more importantly, here's why I edited it. And by the way, I was just listening to a podcast with Jason Bateman, the guy from Arrested Development, and him and his buddies have a podcast called Smart List. They're out there editing movies that they're working on and shows that they're working on, right? The best people will want to get into the nitty gritty. And so I would say if you see yourself as, I just want to be creator, I don't want to edit the podcast, that's okay. You can hire an editor or a producer in the future, but at least the first 5 or 10 episodes, edit yourself, because not only will you pick up a new skill, but you should be very, very well aware of the voice that you want to communicate in the content that you're creating. And there's no way to delegate that. And by doing that, you'll also be able to specifically direct the editor or editors that you're going to be hiring, and also know whether or not you're talking to a producer or editor that's actually good and high quality. So I recommend doing your own. I probably did way more than I needed to, but that's just kind of, I didn't mind the editing process.
Tacking on to the new tools, like 2018, yeah, definitely. You're doing things just the old-fashioned way. Great to learn. Like back, I learned how to do 3D animation on Silicon graphics machines, and most people don't even know what those are, right? Linux, Unix, there's no such thing for 3D animation for Windows or anything like that. But I learned a lot of the basic fundamentals. But these days, with the tools, you have absolutely no excuse not to be able to pump out and test content. We use TimeBolt to edit this show, and it allows us to go a lot faster. And then on top of which, because I learned how to use it, and I've been using it for like almost a year now, then I was able to teach Q and then say, this is what we're looking for in the tools and pass along. So definitely support what Vadim is saying in terms of use the tools, learn how to do them before you start delegating out there, and then you have better control. And you learn, so much as well. Most founders don't have the time to, or don't have the capacity or the resource to go out and hire people, which is great in terms of do it yourself. It's easier than ever. Q, what's another question that we can jump into?
Having worked with startups in both the advertising and SMB marketing space, what's one common mistake you see early stage founders making in terms of product development or market fit?
I would say, again, kudos for Googling. I would say a little bit more of the same. It almost doesn't actually matter what industry that you work in, but the biggest problem and the biggest reason why I see people fail, and failure is just stopping working on something, right? You run out of money and resources, that's it. You got to go do something else or change projects or pivot or whatever it is. And that is building for way too long, mainly for yourself and nobody else. Engineers fall into this trap a lot, and where they love coding, they love working on product, and then they build something with a ton of features and functionality that nobody really needs. So, if you're building an advertising company, for example, or an ad network, well, you have to think about supply and demand. I need to get publishers on this network, and I need to get advertisers on this network. Even if you have ad tech in the middle, and I worked in ad tech for a number of years, you're not going to get anywhere unless you have publishers and advertisers. Pretty simple. So your job is to pick up the phone and call those stakeholders to make sure that they're signed up on your platform when the technology is ready to go. So for almost any business, even if it's a simple business model, a simple revenue model where the customer is really clear, and you're just going after a niche that you think you can own, you got to go out and recruit those people, build that list so that when the product is ready or some usable version of the product is ready, you can hand it off for someone to actually give you feedback and iterate on what you build.
Great answer. Couldn't have said it better myself. Q, next question.
Next question, Ed. From your experience at School 16 and as a mentor, what advice do you give aspiring founders about balancing personal development with personal growth?
So to me, they sound like the same things, unless I'm wrong. But what I will talk about is balancing life in general, right? Because, and I talk to a lot of founders where they, they want to build a company. They have a job. Sometimes the job is not a good fit for their skills or whatever it is, right? But they need to build a company. And actually, Will, our CEO, had an interesting post yesterday because he talked about how he just built a house himself, which I actually didn't even know that he was doing. That he built
I've
his house
seen
from
it.
scratch.
I've seen
Yeah,
it.
it's intense. And he's a CEO, right? And they have a podcast, right? So I think too many people limit themselves for what they can accomplish. Should I invest in personal development or personal growth or my job or whatever it is, right? And look, there is such a thing as spreading yourself too thin where if you try to do everything all at once, you're not going to be good at anything. But for most of us, I believe there are more hours in the day than we think, and it's more so about being efficient with your time. And the other thing I'll say is a lot of people do a poor job with prioritizing, right? So for example, let's say you want to invest in some personal development. Well, what does that mean for you, right? You can't do everything at once. Let's say you want to learn how to edit a podcast and you want to become a good writer, right? Well, maybe you don't want to do both at the same exact time, focused on doing the deep work and putting in the hours for the number one priority skill that you want to develop first. Do that for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, quite frankly. I think a lot of people overestimate how much time they need to invest, in terms of, I need to do this for years to be successful. No, within a year of launching my podcast, I had producers from CBS I was hosting podcasting events across New York City, and I had producers from CBS coming to our events, seeing us as the experts, even though before that year, I had never ran a podcast before. So it doesn't have to take a ton of time, but you do have to put in the hours and do the deep work to develop yourself. It's important to prioritize yourself first, though, so to make sure that you can actually give yourself a chance to get good at something.
Let me add and make it a little spicy. I think that personal development is stupid if it's not directed properly. So I see people get to the point where everyone's just trying to push you into learn this and do that, and you can be this and you can be that. And I think it just fills people's heads. So here's how I'm coaching my kids. I say, if you want to do personal development, professional development, figure out how to balance, do it in alignment with two things. One, if it's just sheer joy, and you're doing it because you enjoy it and it helps you with stress management, creative thinking, it just gets you out, lowers that blood pressure, which I'm working on right now, then do it. And there are so many things that I am interested in that I enjoy just for the sheer enjoyment of wasting my time. So I just waste time with it and I let myself go. Like, I'm totally okay. There you go. Like, for a while, I had to stop because of health issues. But for a while, I was really getting into smoking tobacco pipes, different types of pipes, the Churchills, and then cleaning them, and the different types of tobacco and all those things. It was like fantastic. And I just did it, didn't contribute anywhere in my life. In fact, it was a smelly habit. Nobody enjoyed. The other thing is, I say, don't put effort into it until you've experimented, until you're sure you can make it in the top 10% of something. Let me give you all an example. One of the projects that I'm working on that started off as a personal hobby was writing fantasy novels, right? And I just started writing and I put some stuff out and then I got opinions on it. And what I wanted to hear from actual editors, you can be in the top 10%. And I decided to prioritize my time based on that, but I waited for the signal. And then I said, all right, what's the feedback? I got feedback. It was positive, and I started learning a little more. And then I had someone tell me, this is better than 90% of the stuff that's out there right now. And in anything, I just said, okay. So now I spend a little bit of time every day learning how to be a better writer. Never planned on it. It wasn't part of my career path. I just did it because it will contribute, and it's turning into exploring a startup and all those things. So it does align, but I have to be sure that there's going to be ROI. It's either enjoyment or there's going to be ROI. I see way too many people try to develop these skills, or they try to do stuff, and they're going to be in the bottom 50%, and I just don't see the point. So that's my opinion on that. I'm curious, Vadim, I'm going to let you bring up the rear, okay? So Q and Jen, Q first. What's your opinion on me thinking personal development is stupid, or what is your opinion on personal development as it is?
So I think, the question was a little bit misphrased by myself. My apologies. So it was kind of balancing personal development with business growth, right? And I think I don't think personal development is stupid per se, but I do agree with the aspect of your opinion, Ed, where, you're talking about people kind of filling everybody's head up, right? But I think to be able to differentiate between personal development and business, I think is very important. How far are you going to go if you're a terrible person? And complete lack of self-awareness, that's going to inevitably impact your business, right? So I think personal development is important, but again, to your point, I do agree with doing it in a guided way. What are you trying to address? How are you trying to address it? What are the qualities that you're trying to improve? In what ways are you trying to improve? So being intentional about personal development, I think, is just as important as just being committed to personal development in the first place.
Let me add to that because, Vadim, I think you can support this, and then I want to hear Jen's opinion. We meet founders all the time that I just listen to. Jen sees these founders, and I just think to myself, if you just spent a little more time on your soft skills, emotional regulation, learning to read the room, you'd be so much better off further along in life. But no, you're passive aggressive. You absolutely, when you talk, you monologue to an audience of one. You see this when founders give pitches and they drone on for 10 minutes about their life story, and it just sounds really great in their head. And I'm just thinking to myself, listen, if you were in a room with investors, they would have laughed you out already. Like, they would have said to your face, you're nuts, we're never going to invest in you, etc., because they can be cruel like that. So I agree, personal development is important, but as far as what, that's the balance, that's the question. Jen, what's your thought on personal development or anything I just said in terms of you experiencing these founders with me?
That's a very good point. It's very interesting sitting in the background listening to founders pitch and the way that they come across, their attitude, even just their knowledge in it can come across as arrogant or as confident. And I think that's a good factor to think about when pitching to investors. I think I'd agree with everything that's said, especially Q, just knowing what your reasoning is for personal development. I know several years ago for myself, I think I was so obsessed with trying to make sure that I was always bettering myself. And I got lost in it. And I got to a point where I felt like I was working on this and this and this over here. And I just got so burnt out and I didn't really know what I was doing everything for. And it just blurred everything in my vision of, well, maybe I'm not doing anything. And everything, you can't do everything all at once. So really narrowing in what's the reason for this, doing one thing at a time or a couple things that correspond with each other and slowly walking that path, but ultimately asking yourself, what is the goal? What does it look like down the road that you want to become or how you want to be different?
Let me just be clear. If you want to be a founder and you want to build a unicorn company, we're talking the top 1% to 2% of startups. You want to get to that level, you must be in the top 10% of those personal skills: leadership, communication, emotional intelligence, executive presence, coaching other people, handling crisis situations. You have to be in the top 10%. You will not get there unless you're in the top 10%. And that's the reason a lot of these trillionaire company CEOs have executive coaches and they pay huge amounts of money. I'm talking like $8,000 a day just for the coaching. Like, that's just the level that you need to be at, because when you're dealing with billion-dollar problems, like, you have to have billion-dollar levels of personal development. Vadim, based on all that, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I do think that now that Q clarified the question, I do think that oftentimes your personal development will go hand in hand with business growth. So you're inherently focusing on personal development if your business is growing because you're probably acquiring new skills. There's things that I did with my last company. There's not only things that I accomplished, but also new skills that I had to pick up that I had never done before. Even you talked about getting better at writing. Because we started the podcast, a couple of months after starting, I started writing for a publication called Goalcast, and a couple months after that started writing for Forbes and then eventually Harvard Business Review. I wasn't that great of a writer maybe a year or two before that, but I started writing thousands and thousands of words every single week, and you get better through that process. I like what you said, Ed, earlier about ROI. ROI can come in many different forms. The bare minimum ROI is, do you actually want to do this? Are you actually enjoying this, right? I remember during COVID, I learned how to solve a Rubik's Cube, right? In the beginning, it took me like 4 minutes. It took me a month to do it. Right now, I can do it in under a minute. Not that great. There's children that could do it in 25 seconds. But I wanted to learn how to do it, and I did. And is there a purpose for learning how to solve a Rubik's Cube? No, but it was really fun. And that was our ROI for me. I also took, right before COVID, I took a improv class from Upright Citizens Brigade. And this is just an interesting anecdote in terms of ROI and how to think about these things. I always wanted to try out comedy, and improv just sounded fun. I did some acting in high school and college, and so it made sense for me. And I remember we were all practicing for this big sort of stage day where you invite all your friends and you perform in front of them and do improv in front of them. And I remember the day before it was a 3-hour session, and me and this Iranian guy was super, super funny. We kind of went on stage and we did our little improv skit. And it was one of the funniest things I probably ever done and he's done. And we only did it for 15 people, right? It wasn't in front of an audience. It was during practice. And improv is such that you'll never repeat it again. And at first I thought, oh, this sucks. I wish we could do this in front of an actual audience so other people can see it. But then I realized that moment was so fun and so enjoyable for me, and it'll never be repeated again. But that's okay, because I experienced it, and that's why I put in 3 hours every Friday, for the last couple of months, is to get good enough to do that, to have that kind of experience, and to prepare myself for that big stage. So oftentimes, founders, when your head's down, things are boring, you're alone, you're not getting that recognition, but you're preparing yourself for that big stage, whether it's a big customer or $1 million problem or whatever it might be. So it's worth the effort, but you have to be willing to put in the time.
You do realize, Vadim, that there are people out there juggle 3 Rubik's Cubes and solve them at the same time. So but you're way ahead of me. I've never solved a Rubik's Cube, but let me ask this question. This is something we can end with. All right, let's just open it up. So I just shared that one skill that I'm trying to work on for personal development that I think will lead to professional growth. And that's so great, because imagine you're doing improv in front of 15 people. Well, guess what? How many founders would kill to be presenting in front of 15 customers, right? SaaS customers or executives, and they have to think on their feet. So those skills translate. But here's the question for all of you. What personal skill are you going to work on next? Like I just went there, personal development. So I'm working on writing. So that's a big thing. I'm going to leave the ladies to kind of gather the answers. Vadim, what's your next Rubik's Cube or improv that you're working on?
Yeah, so actually for me, it's writing as well. I want to be a better writer. I want to be published across more and more publications. And generally for me, it actually is content creation and video content creation. I'm not spending a ton of time putting content out there, but I am spending time putting some interesting content that's exciting for me to consume, that I think is fun or funny or whatever it is. And that takes hours, and no one's going to ever see that content, but it's fun for me. So those are 2 things. The third, I would say professionally, is I've been advising a lot of entrepreneurs on B2B sales. I've done a lot of B2B sales in my career, but I'm increasingly more interested in multi-stakeholder, long sales cycle, 6 to 12 month sales, which is very, very complicated. It's a little bit more outside of what I did in my career, because I did sort of more transactional, few stakeholder sales. So I'm consuming a lot of content from thought leaders and creators about that, because sales is actually changing a lot right now in the market, because people buy things differently, people consume content differently, and I want to be on top of all the current trends for how to be an effective B2B salesperson.
Yeah, and that's how you become a thought leader. And I can definitely say creating content, being a content creator is a completely different skill than the content itself and how to present it. That's something that I was just blown away, even learning to lead a podcast and putting this all together. Like that's just a skill. Hugh, what's your skill that you're working on?
Actually, it kind of goes right in line with Vadim's point there. He was talking about earlier time management and prioritization. And so funny enough, 2 weeks ago, I got me a nice little agenda. I haven't used one of these since maybe university. So that's something that I'm prioritizing. Obviously, I have other goals and long-term goals and things like that. But before being able to reach those, being able to prioritize and manage your time, because no matter what I choose to do in the future, that's going to be a very important thing to learn how to do.
100%. Jen, what are you working on?
I hate to say that I'm roughly along the same lines, but organization for me, which as much as I am a very organized person, I feel like I have a little bit here and there. So narrowing everything down into tools that specifically work and are all in one area. And that goes for work and personal life right now.
Well, I will be the benefactor of you learning more organization skills. So I fully endorse that 100%. Same with you, Q. This is just us saying, work on yourself. You can work on stuff. Just want to encourage. If we're talking about these skills and we want to learn and we want to explore, well, how much more can everybody else do it, right? If Vadim can solve a Rubik's Cube, I know other people can learn how to do it, because Vadim has proven that you can learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube. Everything is a skill, creating content, all those things. Encourage all the founders out there. That's going to end our show today. Lots of really great topics. And Vadim's just going to be a regular on the show because he's lead advisor here at Startups.com. So thank you to everybody who has checked us out, who has been in the audience, all the great questions and the conversations. Thank you, Q. Thank you, Jen. We are here every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. check us out, join Startups.com, go to the website. A lot of resources there for you to look at for free. You can ask us questions, and maybe you want to join our accelerator so you can spend time with me and Vadim and continue to support founders all over the place, because we are an online community of founders accelerating other founders. Once again, Startups.com live. That's it. One in the books. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.